Tell me about meeting Adam Levine, Jesse Carmichael, and Mickey Madden at Brentwood, and tell me about your path of how you guys all came together to form Kara's Flowers and later Maroon 5.
Well, that was kind of the unique gift that Brentwood gave me, was that Adam, Jesse, and Mickey and I were some of the very few creatively minded people in the school. We found each other out of necessity.
So let me do a little intro here. So my next guest is a friend of now 25 years. Ryan Dusick is a multi-talented individual, best known as the founding drummer of the Grammy Award-winning band Maroon 5, but his journey extends far beyond music and into writing and therapy. Welcome, Ryan.
Thank you, Scott. It's great to be here.
It's good to see you. Your studio looks great.
Thanks, man. Yours as well. Is that your actual studio? Or is that just a backdrop?
It's just, oh no, it's my studio. I just built it in a little corner of my living room.
Oh, okay. Yeah, this is my garage that's been converted into a first studio, then office space, then man cave.
It looks killer. Does your brother have that same color wall in his house? I think he might.
I don't remember.
His old house, his LA house.
Oh, yeah. At one point,
red wall.
That's possible.
Yeah. So Ryan's brother Josh is also a friend of mine, and also a very talented musician, and really kind of good at everything.
Yeah, he's kind of a Renaissance man. He's basically. Yeah, I mean, he was a doctor. Still is technically a doctor, but does a lot of research, and he builds amps and guitars
and basses, and harvests his own animals, and makes incredible food. And yeah, he's a real artist. He had, I used to go over to his house and just stare at his chickens walking around the yard. He'd be working out his own perfect storm of chicken feed. And yeah,
he's a unique individual for sure.
Yeah, so I always like to start with origin stories. So let's start at the beginning. You grew up here in LA. What was your childhood like? What did your parents listen to? What was your intro to music?
Well, my childhood was, I grew up on the kind of west side of LA, right in the middle of LA, right in between Beverly Hills, Carthay Circle, and Hollywood, or in Miracle Mile, that area. So like, pretty much right in the middle of the city and surrounded on all sides by different unique neighborhoods with different influences. I played soccer and baseball with the very wealthy kids from Beverly Hills and Beverly Hills Little League and AYSO. And then I went to school with kids that were, some of which were bussed in from the inner city public elementary school, some of which were in my neighborhood, kind of middle class. So there are a lot of different influences on me in terms of just different ways of being and different ways of thinking. And musically, within my own family, there was a lot of different influences. My dad grew up with a father who was a Hollywood makeup artist in the 50s and 60s, and a sister who was trained by him to become a Broadway singer when she was a teenager. So my dad was singing harmonies with his older sister and his dad, who played the piano, when he was like 4 years old. And, just was his influences. My dad was kind of like a very 1950s goody two shoes type of all-American, preppy kind of guy. He's an attorney by trade, but he wasn't exactly like the hippie burnout of the 60s and 70s. He was into like James Taylor and Cat Stevens and more kind of mellow folky stuff, Crosby, Stills and Nash. But he also was really still just kind of stuck in his like middle school adolescence of early 60s sock hop music, that kind of thing. So there was a lot of that as well. And then there was the Broadway influence, of course, of my aunts. But on my mom's side, my mom is Latin American. She was from Mexico originally, and my uncles played guitar and drums. One of them played both Latin guitar as well as jazz and other influences. And then my drummer, Uncle Rick, played jazz drums. So a lot of different sounds going on around me in that regard. And then it was the 80s and it was LA and it was Rick Dees in the morning. And I was listening to Michael Jackson and Prince and David Bowie and Billy Idol and everything, I mean, just so all over the map. And then my older brother and my cousin David got into hard rock and classic rock and were playing the guitar. So then that's when the real big rock blues kind of influence came in. And when I was like 7, it was me and my brother jumping up and down on my brother's bed, listening, doing air guitar to Van Halen, Jump and Panama and that kind of thing.
I remember it very, very well. Jumping ahead, so you in a way we have similar upbringings, not musically or parentally, but we were both kind of the middle class kids at the very rich high school. Right. So like I went to a public school, but it was a public school that there was a limo line in the morning. Like there were a lot of like old like American children of like captains of industry, like old Chicago people, Wrigley's, Winchesters, people like that. And then we were just these kind of like, I think we had like a small house but my parents wanted to be in the good school district, that sort of thing. Tell me about, to those who don't know, the Brentwood School is a very prestigious, kind of art centric. Is that fair to say?
Not art centric. The rest of what you said is accurate, but definitely not art centric. At least not when I was there.
Okay, so but a prestigious West Side school that had a lot of, shall we say, with non-pejoratively, nepo babies. Tell me about meeting Adam Levine, Jesse Carmichael, and Mickey Madden at Brentwood, and tell me about your path of how you guys all came together to form Kara's Flowers and later Maroon 5.
Well, that was kind of the unique gift that Brentwood gave me, was that Adam, Jesse, and Mickey and I were some of the very few creatively minded people in the school. We found each other out of necessity because I was playing music with my older brother in the school pep band and orchestra, and some of his friends who were, 2, 3, 4 years older than me. And they were all going off to college when I was just a sophomore in high school. And so I was left with very few options in terms of other musicians to play with. And just to back up a little bit, to give you more of a perspective of the environment we were in, I've come full circle to embrace there's pros and cons to every situation and every environment. But at the time, I found the environment a little stifling, and I felt like I didn't really fit in because it was very much a college prep, very elite sort of. The idea was we're sending kids off to the Ivy League. They're going to go be titans of industry, or doctors, lawyers, businessmen, and eventually make huge donations to the school. That's the kind of environment it was that I found myself in. And it's not that I didn't belong there academically or that I felt like I couldn't really fit in just in terms of achievement. It was just that I was being a middle-class kid and living on the other side of Beverly Hills. I felt like I was kind of the kid from the other side of the tracks in some ways.
Yeah, from the cheap seats.
Right, and I think my dad was Jewish, and that was part of the majority at the school, but my mom was Latin American, and that was a very small minority. I mean, there was one other kid in my class who was Latin American, and so I mean, I don't think people thought of me as Latin American because I hate to use this term, but passing, sort of. But I think that I was privy to the conversations, and I think that there wasn't like overt racism a lot of the time, but it was just kind of these, microaggressions of just kind of referring to their maids and their housekeepers and their gardeners, and so that just kind of made me feel a little othered, and so I just didn't really feel like I fit in, and I was trying to find ways to distinguish myself and figure out who I was, and music became the thing. And so when I found Adam and Jesse and Mickey to be on the same page with me in terms of the music we were listening to. And at that time, it was grunge. It was Nirvana, Pearl Jam, Soundgarden, Alice in Chains, and then like the Chili Peppers and stuff like that.
Sure.
I found kindred spirits. I found people that I felt accepted and understood, and it was my place. So that was the thing that got me through my teenage years, was starting that band.
So, musically, how did it begin? Like it begins with other people jamming together? Were you covering your favorite music and just jamming, or did you jump right into writing songs together?
It started in the pep band with doing covers. The first time, I think we may have played a couple times the previous school year before my brother went off to college. But the first time that the original four members played like a proper performance, it was Rage Against the Machine's "Killing in the Name,"
Great,
which was
great.
just absolutely apropos for the place that I was at in my life in starting a band. It was, fuck you, I won't do what you tell me. So we were running through that song in the school orchestra room on campus in the middle of activities period or whatever it was. And I'd played with older guys who were more accomplished musicians. I had played in clubs at that point already. I'd played at the Whiskey A Go-Go and the Troubadour and the Roxy, but there was just something about the chemistry between the four of us that was really unique. And I felt like even though these aren't the highest caliber and most experienced musicians I've ever played with, we're just really locked in on the same page.
Chemistry, yeah.
Yeah, so it was that, and then immediately after we did that performance, it kind of transitioned into us starting a band and writing our own music. We skipped over a lot of that cover band part of development. We just really were creative from day one.
So tell me about the songwriting process. Did you all collaborate? Parts? Because I don't even know this. Like, did Adam write all the lyrics? Did some of you do that? Like, tell me how they were all pieced together, particularly the songs for Jane era.
Well, it took about 8 years of evolution to get to that era, because I was 16 years old when we started the band. Adam was 14, going on 15, and the first year or two was music in the style of the music we were listening to in 1994, 95. It was grunge, it was alternative, and actually in the early days, I was writing a lot of the music because I was the one who had a bit more experience. I was the kind of type A personality who wanted to take control of everything and run the show.
Sure. Yeah.
But within 2 years, I would say that the popular music had shifted in terms of at least alternative rock to the kind of Weezer, Green Day era.
Yeah.
And Adam and Jesse were really into more melodic things. I mean, Adam's natural knack for melody was coming through, and Jesse's sort of more experimental and forward-thinking proclivities as a musician were coming through, and they just had a real chemistry as a duo writing songs. And so by 95, 96, we were writing more songs that were influenced by the Beatles and 60s Britpop. And then, Weezer and Green Day and that kind of era of guitar rock. And so that's when, the major songwriting kind of shifted to Adam and Jesse as the focal point. But I would say that in general, it was always collaborative in terms of the arrangements, in terms of the directions we would go and the choices we were making. We always had equal input on every choice that we made. It was humbling for me, being that type A personality, to kind of hand over the reins of the initial inspiration of songwriting, but at least I understood that I had a role that was significant in terms of just how everything came together.
It's nice when there's democracy and not just dictatorship, right?
Yeah, at least when I was in the band, that's the way it was. And even up to the songs about Jane era, when Adam was really kind of, coming to the front as the leader of the band more and the front man, we still would get in a room together and really, he wanted all of us to put our stamp on the songs and to have input. And There were songs on Songs About Jane that came about totally organically in terms of just the four and then five of us in a room together coming up with material all together. But at that point, it was Adam writing all the melodies and the lyrics himself mostly.
Yeah, I just, I thought you guys, I mean, I've known you since, kind of the early days of Cars Flowers, and I've been to plenty. I'd been to some, I wouldn't say plenty. I've been to a couple of your shows where there might have been more people on stage than in the audience, and have
Sure.
some pictures when Adam was doing his sort of Bruce Springsteen Born in the USA look with the tank top and the bandana and that whole
Forgot
thing. And
about that.
I'm pretty sure he doesn't love those photos, but whatever. Uh,
Definitely.
14 Below, Glass House, all of that
Oh my
stuff.
God. Yeah,
Uh,
14 Below. Wow.
yeah. In Santa Monica. I don't know if it's even still there.
I remember the name. I don't even have a mental image of what that looked
It was
like.
like on 4th or 5th, one of those north-south streets in Santa Monica with like a marquee on the
Oh,
front and
yes, yes,
nothing
yes,
else, and it was
yes.
all painted flat black. But
Yes.
I
And
look at the photos that I took from those nights, and God, Jesse looks like he's a preteen. The little baby face little kid, and
yeah.
it's like, and now to jump ahead a little bit, I remember, you telling me about your wrist and your shoulder injuries, and then I remember running into Jesse. I don't remember the timeline at the farmers market in Hollywood, and I was like, "What are you guys? What do you mean you're leaving the band?" And I was like practically shaking you. I didn't know about your substance abuse issues, but I was like, "Are you crazy? Learn to play drums with one hand, like Rick Allen from Def Leppard. Do you know how rare it is to get a Comet ride like this? You're not leaving the band." And you're like, "Scott, I'm leaving the band." And then Jesse's like, "Yeah, I need some time off." And I'm like, "Are you effing stupid?" But it all worked out in the end. But I was just like, because I was like, your guys kind of trying to be older brother and look out for you. But I was just like, this never happens. Don't quit.
It wasn't really a choice that I had at the time. It wasn't a choice to quit or not. I
I
couldn't play the
know.
drums.
I know.
Um,
I didn't know the extent of it, but me, I'm impetuous and impulsive and passionate.
no, I know that about you.
Yeah. By the way, let me quickly plug. I love this well-worn copy I have of Ryan's book called Harder to Breathe, and the forward is written by Adam Levine. And some beautiful quotes from the other band members, and just a great book. Let's dig into that a little bit. Tell me about the sort of tell me about the rise of Maroon 5. Tell me how it all happened. I knew you guys were a club band. I only saw you guys once at a large venue. And that was at the Irvine Spectrum.
Hmm.
Where I think you were supporting John Mayer.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. At that point, I think it was called the Irvine Meadows Amphitheater or something like that.
I played there once too. A
You did.
story for another time, but yeah,
Oh
like the
wow.
one time I played, one of two times I
Okay.
ever played a big venue. But
Yeah.
yeah, tell me about, just walk me through the process, because you guys were a club band. What I loved about you guys is that a lot of bands are just kind of insular. What I loved about you guys is you were really part of a community. Like, most of your gigs were always the same group of friends. It was usually Phantom Planet was usually the headliner for a good long time,
Mm.
followed by you guys, followed by Rilo Kiley, which is Jenny Lewis's band, who's now quite a successful star in her own right, and
Mhm.
Rooney. And you
Right.
were all kind of this family, and I really loved it, because coming from Chicago, it was kind of every man for himself. There wasn't such a community like there was with you guys, and it was a really special time. Can we talk about that a little?
Yeah, that really was a lovely time in all of our lives. I think, we made a record in 97 under the name Cars Flowers that very few people know about. It was a big deal for us at the time because we got our first major label record deal and made a record that everyone thought was going to be a big hit. The problem at the time, I think, was that it was precocious for us as teenagers, but the lyrics just weren't there yet, and Adam hadn't really come into his own as a lyricist yet. But in that time period between that record and the record that became Songs About Jane, the first Maroon 5 record, was a real evolution and a time when we built our own sound and our own fan base in LA, and it was that community of other bands that we played with. And it was an interesting cross section of people in that group because I was at UCLA at the time. Mickey actually was going to UCLA for a while as well. And then the rest of the guys were living in Hollywood. And so we had, weekends in Hollywood going to all the clubs and that scene and the whole hipster scene of Los Feliz and Silver Lake and everything that was burgeoning around the turn of the millennium. And then I was at UCLA with my kind of preppy college kids and surfer dudes, and there was a mishmash of different styles of folks that would come to the parties and to the shows, and it was really cool. It was just really eclectic, and our style was really eclectic at the time, and we were playing a lot of different kinds of music all over the map, just trying to discover what our unique style was going to be. And it was when we really got into R&B and classic soul music and even hip hop that we started that Adam discovered his voice, both as a singer and as a lyricist, and we discovered our sound as a band. And that's when it was like a renaissance in our lives and in the band that led to this, ultimately finding what really was going to work for us. And, when you're in the middle of it, you don't recognize like it's the good old days and it's never going to be like this again. But it was a special moment. And even the making of Songs About Jane was that. I mean, we had a lot of our friends there in the studio partying almost every weekend and just hanging out. And we wanted it to be a casual vibe. We almost wanted to have, for you to be able to hear the sound of our friends on the tape with us. And it just became, but then that wasn't the end of you'd think, okay, we made that record and then we blew up, but it was like a 2-year slog for, just driving around the country in a van and playing every show you could possibly imagine, every tour as unknowns, just building up a fan base, one group, one 50-person audience at a time, until we finally had that tipping point.
So tell me about, because part of our friend group was some famous musicians' friends. You had Savannah Buffett, you had Jimmy's daughter, you had Willie and Jackson Nash and Niall, who were Graham Nash's kid. And I know Graham was helpful to you guys getting your demos done at Conway Recording. Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, well, the Nash kids went to Brentwood with us, so Willie was a good friend of the guys, and also don't forget the other guy that Adam lived in this house in Los Feliz at the time with Willie and Savannah and Sam Farrar.
Lowry.
The Lowry house. And Sam, his pedigree was his dad was the songwriter and producer of like every Olivia Newton-John song ever written. So
in Grease.
Yeah, and even songs in Grease. Yeah. So I mean, people know Sam now. He's actually in Maroon 5, but he was in Phantom Planet, the band you mentioned earlier at the time. And so we had this. Yeah, awesome. I love those guys. So we had this incredible just group of people that were well connected and very talented around us. And it was the parties at the Lowry house. You'd see everyone from Ashton Kutcher and I don't know, maybe like Jenna Malone was there a lot.
Jenna was there a lot. Mary-Kate and Ashley Olsen came to a Halloween party, and that was actually really funny. So I met Zooey Deschanel. Had plans. We had plans to meet at that party at the same time, and she came dressed as Mary-Kate Olsen. I have a photo of it in that sort of in style era. The big sunglasses and the wooden necklace, and the look at her face at the Starbucks cup and the kind of bohemian dress. And I go, Zoe, and I took a photo and I said, Zoe, that is the most brilliant costume at this party. And then Mary-Kate Olsen walks in, sees Zooey Deschanel mocking her, spins on her heels and stormed off.
Oh my God.
But like, I will never forget the night you weren't there, but the night that I first met the guys, some of the guys. So remember Ari, my old roommate? Circa
Aristotle? Yeah, of course.
So Aristotle and I were roommates, and I used to get a table like at 6 or 8 top round at Dublin's in 1999 because I knew the girl who was the club promoter, and we never used all 6 or 8 seats, but we'd always get it. It was nice to have a place to sit. So me and Ari walk in there one night, and Adam Levine, Alex Greenwald, Sam Farrar, and Jacques Brautbar are sitting at our table. So Ari not being the not so friendly guy he was. He goes, "You're at our table. Get the F out of here." And I'm like, "Dude, calm down. There's only 2 of us. There's 4 of them, 5 of them, whatever. I was just let that you guys can stay. It's my table. You guys can stay." And like they were like little kids, like Adam was a pimple-faced little kid. Jacques looked like a baby. And I was like, "You guys in a band or something?" And they're like, "Yeah, we're in 2 bands." And I was like, "Oh, that's so cool." And I say, "What band are you in?" to Jacques, because he's sitting next to me. He goes, "I'm in a band called Phantom Planet." And I said, "No way, I just bought your CD yesterday." And he said, "Nobody bought our CD." I said, "I bought your CD yesterday." And he goes, "Where?" I said, "I was doing a photo shoot at Sofia Coppola's store in Hollywood, and it was playing in the background." And I said, "I love these pop songs. What is this?" And they said, "It's Sophia's cousin Jason's band, Phantom Planet." And I said, "Can I buy a copy?" And they said, "Yeah." So they were like, "We cannot believe you know our music." So then we became fast friends, and they would come share our table every week. And then the Lowry thing happened, and that was every single weekend was like a great party. And that's where you and I really got to know each other, and at shows. And
Right.
yeah, some heady wild times.
It absolutely was. And it was, you never knew like who you were going to meet and what was going to happen every weekend. And, I wasn't as plugged into the Hollywood scene as those guys were because I was, in college doing my thing a lot of the time. But I always looked forward to the weekend when I had head over there. It was like I was living almost like a double life between my very responsible, getting an English degree from UCLA life, and I also had my whole other group of friends there. It was like a separate, really a double life, and then the Hollywood life of the band. Which it's weird. I kind of feel like when I look back on my life that I kind of fit in a lot of places in a lot of different contexts, but I never felt like I fully fit in any of them. Like if you asked my friends at UCLA, they would say I was the artsy, slightly like metrosexual, effeminate guy from Hollywood in that group, and I didn't really fit in with the bros totally. They loved me, but I wasn't like one of them. And then in the
Yeah.
Hollywood scene, I think they looked at me as more kind of a jockey, collegey guy who wasn't really like a hipster because I wasn't really plugged into the scene like that. So it's weird that I could kind of walk in these different circles and not really fully fit in any of them, but be comfortable enough.
Yeah, and it's like I've always had a very diverse group of friends, but in that group, in your guys' group, I was still like I was quite aware of my position. I was the old guy in the group, but I did my best to sort of, I always say I'm not infinitely wise, but I'm infinitely experienced. Anything you've done, I've probably already overdone. So I would always try to just give good advice the best I could.
Well, you were Scott.com for the longest time.
Yes,
That's
I
what we knew
was.
you.
Yes, I was. Ricky Martin gave me that awful name.
Really? Didn't know
Yes.
that.
Yeah, because he thought that the internet was new and he was just hearing of it. And he's like, "Oh, you're like into the internet and stuff?" And I was like, "Yeah." He's like, "You're like Scott.com." And I'm like, "Oh, great. I hope this one doesn't stick." But it did. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
I used to do websites and design networks and for the studios. And yeah, that was a period of time before photography. After music, but before photography.
Yeah, well, that's how you were introduced to me, Scott.com, and that's what I called you for probably a decade.
Indeed. So what was tell me a little bit about the when you got off the bread and water mud tours and started playing support gigs. Tell me what the tours were like. The only ones I can remember are Jessica Simpson, who I'm still friends with her mother, and I usually spend the holidays at the Simpsons. Um
Really?
and yeah, my one of my old buddies who went to Beverly Vista and Beverly High, who's a landscape designer, ended up falling in love and marrying Tina Simpson.
Wow. I haven't seen Jessica in a long time, but yeah, I had a lot of fun with those guys. Jessica and Casey were awesome.
Yeah, there's
I
and
remember.
they're sweet as angels. I mean, I really adore them. I mean, I have never met people less affected by fame and fortune than Jessica, Ashley, Tina, the whole lot of them.
Oh yeah, it was like hanging out with people in Texas. It was just real American folk.
So I'll tell you a quick anecdote from that first 4th of July party. So I like to be a gracious guest. I was always taught you bring something when you go to someone's home. So I went to Sweet Lady Jane's on Melrose and I had them make a little small cake, that classic berry cake of theirs, but I had them make it in the shape of Texas with the Lone Star on it. So I bring the
Nice.
I bring it to the party and I hand Tina the little box and she opens it up and she's like, "You know the way to this Texas girl's heart." And then like an hour later, she's kind of avoiding eye contact with me and I'm like, "Are you okay, Tina?" She goes, "Scott, I screwed up." And I said, "What'd you do?" She goes, "I had to give your cake away." And I said, "What do you?" "Well, it was your cake. What happened?" She goes, "I got this a-hole neighbor who complains about noise all the time, and it's the 4th of effing July, and yours is the prettiest cake here, so I just did it to shut him up." And I was like, "That's why you're a genius business person, and I'm not. That was your cake to do whatever you want with." And she's like, "I still feel crappy about it." Uh, so that was pretty funny, but so a couple of anecdotes from those tours. I mean, this is the first time you playing sheds, arenas. What was that like?
Yeah. So, I mean, I guess it was before we really blew up completely. Like in 2004 is when it crossed over to, us doing major headlining tours. But before that, we were opening. I think the first arena tour we did was opening for John Mayer at the end of 2002, and then in 2003 we did a tour opening for Matchbox 20. That was
Oh,
an arena
right.
tour. And then that summer, I think it was that summer, maybe it was the next summer, we did a tour. Yeah, it was definitely that summer with John Mayer and Counting Crows. Um,
So how thrilling was it? I remember Jesse called me after the show, and I think it was a Jessica Simpson show after playing Madison Square Garden. And I was like, what does that feel like to go play a venue that is mythical? That, Madison Square Garden, everyone's played there. Zeppelin, Elvis, Sinatra, everyone's played there. What did that feel like? Was it awesome or was it
well,
just another gig?
well, when you first do it, it's awesome. I mean, just like anything else in life, it becomes, every arena looks exactly the same at a certain point. Every locker room that you're hanging out in before the show, but there's a point at which it's new and it's overwhelming. I mean, the first time we went on stage in an arena, we were opening for John Mayer in Philadelphia, and of course we were nervous. We were, just like didn't know, is this going to translate to 12,000 people the way it does in a small theater or a club? Um, and John was great. I mean, John, we met him literally like 20, 30 minutes before we went on stage. We were in the backstage, in an arena. It's like there were hockey nets and whatever else back there, just a big open space in the innards of the arena. And John came over and introduced himself to us. And I don't know if he did this just to kind of break the tension and knew that we were nervous, or if it was just John being John. But he just kind of broke into like a 20-minute almost stand-up routine where we're all just standing around and he's telling stories and none of us can get a word in edgewise. He's a verbose guy, but he's very funny and very charming. But all of us were kind of almost kicking each other because we're like, is this guy nuts, or what is happening exactly? Because he was telling very like intimate story. He was dating Jennifer Love Hewitt at the time, and he was telling
Right.
us very intimate stories of their relationship and talking about men and women and relationships. He's like, women in relationships, they always want to like, pull the car over every 3 minutes and like check under the hood, like how's the oil, how's the, do we need more brake fluid? And he's like I'm a guy, I just want to get the car out on the highway and get some miles behind us, just see where it's going to take us before we pull over and start looking under the hood. And we're all just kind of looking at each other like, where did this come from? We're like literally going on stage in front of 12,000 people for the first time in 10 minutes. And he's telling us this total non sequitur, but it was funny. And then he did this wonderful thing where, we were the only opening act. And so we were directly before him. And the house was only about like a quarter full when, they're supposed to announce us and the lights are supposed to go down. And he told the house, like, hold off. We want to get the room a little more full. And so they like lowered the lights and made it very dramatic and stuff. And then he went out to center stage and like the place went wild. Of course, he walks onto the stage before the opening act comes on, and he just starts talking to them and telling them about how you're going to love this opening band. The line he said was, they're my favorite new band of 2002, and they're going to be your favorite new band of 2003 when they become huge stars. And he's like, give
What a
them,
gentleman. What a
yeah, yeah.
gentleman. That's so great.
And so we walk out to the darkness. If you walk on stage in an arena, it's very different than a club or even a theater, in that it's almost like you're in outer space, because it's just a big empty black space. You can see little lights, just like the exit signs and cell phones and stuff like that. Um, but it's just feels like you're in an airplane hangar, and there's just, distant echoes off the walls when you make any noise. And it's actually really quiet on stage. That's what a lot of people don't realize, because the huge speakers are out in front of you.
Yeah, the mains
And
are in front of you.
yeah, so you're not hearing any of that on stage, just kind of reverberations coming from the room, and your little sound wedge at the side of the stage that's giving you, it's your monitor, but it's not overpowering the way it is in a small room. And so you don't really get a sense of the energy in the room the way you would do in a smaller room, where people are closer to you and you can feel their presence and look into their eyes. So we played a couple songs in the darkness like that, and we're just kind of looking at each other like, I think it's going all right. I can't tell. And then we were in the middle of Sunday morning, or no, it was the intro to Sunday morning. Like every song almost, I would play the beat, the drum beat, while Adam would talk and do whatever he had to do, and then we'd kick into the song. We kind of did like a James Brown thing, where we'd play one song, and right when that song ended, the beat to the next song would start, which was cool, but it was exhausting for me because I would never stop playing the whole time. But when I'm playing the beat to Sunday morning, and Adam goes, hold on, let's bring down the house lights. I want to see you guys. So, or sorry, bring up the house lights. So they bring up the house lights, the lights come on, and we get our first glimpse of a packed arena. We're talking about 12,000 people, all just completely just consumed with what we're doing on stage. And he's like, how are you guys doing tonight? And they just go crazy. And we realized, okay, we've got them. We didn't realize it until we saw their faces, but we've got them. And it was just an incredible feeling, because we had gone into a club, a small room before, and dominated that space and known, okay, we won 500 new fans, but this was 12,000. And I was like, it was almost like a surreal moment, because I looked to the back of the arena, the whole, like the very top where the very cheapest seats are, and you could see people standing up against the back wall of the arena, waving their hands like this, and they looked like teeny little ants. And I just kind of like was laughing to myself. I almost like dropped my sticks, because I was just giddy. It's like, this is just surreal. And so we played. I always
loved that white light trick. Like Bruce Springsteen was really good with the white light trick. It's a very effective way to rev people up. And I remember John Bon Jovi, he used to have this bit where he would point up to the top balcony and he'd be like, you know what? I was you guys up there. I could never afford to live down here. I was you guys. And it's to really get in there and do all
connecting
those
with the common man.
Yeah. All right. So let's what my opinion of you, which was obviously incorrect, was like you were the kind of good boy of the grown-up good boy of the organization. I didn't know that you had any substance abuse issues. So if we could talk about that, where the beginning, middle, and end of that, and how you found recovery and became a therapist and wrote this lovely book.
Well, you were correct that I was the good boy. My whole life, that was a big part of my identity. I was the good boy from the time I was a little kid all the way up to touring a couple years deep into Songs About Jane. But things change. Basically what happened was I was the last one to try drinking or smoking pot or smoking cigarettes or any of that stuff. I was very anti all of that. As a teenager, I didn't even try pot until I was like 22. Actually, it was Will Nash who gave me my first weed. And they were telling me, like, you're not going to get high the first time. That's what everyone says. Like, you're not going to get high. You're not even be able to figure out how to inhale. And I was, so we were sitting in an apartment in Westwood with a bunch of my UCLA friends, Adam Levine, Will Nash, and Will has got this, whatever, the hydroponic super weed. And
the nuclear weed.
Right. And he's like packing these huge green bowls each time and passing and giving me the greens each time. And I'd never done it before. I'm just like, and like within 20 minutes, my scalp was melting. I was like, I was losing my mind. I was almost having like a psychotic break, and I didn't know what to do. I was supposed to go meet my family right after that for dinner, and not right after that, but I had a couple hours, and I couldn't even like think, let alone drive myself there. So a friend of mine took me, and all I could think to do was like drink a pitcher of beer to try to get out of the anxiety I was feeling.
What a
So
great idea. Yeah.
great idea, right?
Yeah.
So I show up at
Capital.
Benihana. I show up at Benihana in West Hollywood, and my brother. It wasn't my parents. It was my brother and his friends. And I walked. My brother tells the story. I walk in. I just kind of look around. I got like overwhelmed and made a beeline for the bathroom and just like hid in there for a little while. And my brother was like, "What just happened?" And he came in and found me, and I was just like hiding in the bathroom. And then I finally came out. I put on my sunglasses at the table at Benihana and was just like totally out of it. So that was my first like sort of meltdown in terms of being intoxicated.
Yeah, I could
But
never I could never keep up with those guys with the ganja, you know, like I came from an era where you could smoke a joint with somebody, two of you, and get like a slight buzz, but this was a whole brave new world.
yeah, I didn't know what I was getting myself into, but drinking in general in college and in that time in my early to mid 20s was all just fun. It wasn't in my mind at the time, it wasn't problematic. It wasn't causing problems in my life. It was something that seemed appropriate for the scene that I was in because I had been so straight laced and kind of almost uptight, really, up until that point. It was embraced by even my family and my friends. It's like, okay, Ryan's finally like loosening the reins a little bit. He's allowing himself to have some fun, and it did
Yeah.
facilitate at that time sort of a more outgoing, fun attitude in terms of just socially. And so it was working for me. It allowed me to release some of the self-consciousness and anxiety and to be more connected. And I just kind of took that attitude on the road with me when I was 24, 25, going on the road on Songs About Jane. I decided, well, this is working for me in college and around town. I'm just going to try to enjoy this experience as much as I can. I don't know how long we're going to be on the road, but the first time we did it in 97, I was homesick the whole time and kind of had a stick up my butt. So this time I want to just kind of have fun and let loose. And it wasn't that for the first couple of years that I was out of control. I just think that when we had a night off, I would tie one on to try to like blow off some steam. If I knew we didn't have anything to do the next day, a travel day or whatever, I would do that. In general, I don't really remember drinking a ton before we went on stage or being hungover on stage that very often, maybe a couple times.
But you
So,
also weren't really a skirt chaser, were you? You weren't the groupie
well,
guy,
no,
or were
I
you a little?
always, no, I always, I was a relationship guy. I was kind of like a serial monogamist. I had a serious relationship for a couple of years, senior year of high school through my first couple of years of college, and then another one that was like 3.5 years right after that. And then by the
Right.
time I was on the road for Songs About Jane, I was with Sean. But that was tough though, because going on the road at 24, 25, wanting to have fun and enjoy the experience, not knowing if I'm going to be gone for 4 years, which was what it ended up being, and then having a girlfriend back home. I mean, that's really a difficult thing to do. And we had best intentions going in, but within a few months, it was clear like this is going to be a real challenge. So we went through different phases where we kind of like made an agreement at one point, like let's not have any expectations. But even that was tough because I wasn't running around like you said, like chasing, but there were moments that were
Yeah, we all
ill-advised
have our
moments.
indiscretions.
And I, of course, coming home and being with Sean, I had to, at a certain point, be honest about that. And so it was still difficult, even though we weren't like technically committed to each other. And then we got recommitted and then we had a breakup. And so it was like you add that level to already a kind of an unbalanced lifestyle. Then you have all the drama of that, of trying to maintain a relationship. And, over time, it does kind of change you. I think the lifestyle, I think that the goody two shoes that I was, it's cliche, but it wasn't that like I went into the music world and it just turned me into the devil with the drugs and the alcohol and everything sunk its teeth into me. It's kind of insidious because the normal behaviors are just slightly different. The expectations are slightly different. And it wasn't that we were being crazy like Motley Crue or those images we had in the 1980s of the over the top debauchery. It's just that over time, the lifestyle does kind of affect you. And by the time I was having my problems with drumming and my confidence and everything that was going on internally and physically, there was a shift that happened where the alcohol started to become an agent of coping. You know, it was, instead of to facilitate the good times, it started to become a way of coping with the negative feelings. And that really came to a head when I stopped playing. It was when I wasn't performing anymore, and I had a lot more free time, and I didn't have a lot of responsibilities. And now I had some money as well, which is, you know, when you have freedom and lack of accountability and a lot of people enabling you, that's when it really ramped up, and it became me just kind of escaping and avoiding the things that I didn't want to deal with. And that's when it became more of a problem.
How painful was that crash and burn of having to fall back to earth?
Very painful. It was the most difficult thing I had to go through in my life. You know, nothing really, I think, could have prepared me for it. Um, and also because, you know, when you're going through something like that, as much as it's always in your mind, there's a level of denial until you have to really admit that it's happening, and then eventually really admit that it's over. And that moment, you know, that moment when I had to really come to grips with it was a turning point in my life. I look at it as like everything that came before it and everything that came after. And that's why I chose to make it the opening scene of my book, Harder to Breathe. Because it's not that I didn't see it coming, that the band, you know, ultimately told me it was time to move on. Because I hadn't been playing for a year at that point, and we were trying
Yeah, it was
everything to get
obvious.
me back
Yeah.
behind the drums. It just wasn't working. But it was just that I was this thing that I knew was coming, but I was still just holding on to some amount of denial and rationalization about. Finally, I couldn't deny it anymore, and it was a reality that came crashing in, and it was terrible. And I just really fell off a cliff and went into a period of real self-destructive, nihilistic behavior for a while there. Um, after a year or so of that, I mean, friends and family were kind of telling me they thought they were worried about me and that I was kind of seemed like I was drowning. And I just didn't know where I belonged at that point. I didn't know what my identity was. It was my identity was so wrapped up in being in that band because I had spent over a decade of my life building that. That I did. I mean, even when I was with them, I felt disconnected because I wasn't one of them anymore, and there was this difference in our lives at that point. So but I didn't know who I was separate from them. So I was like trying to go to the parties at Adam's house in the Hollywood Hills and live that life, but then it would end with me just feeling really triggered, and so I'd drink more, and it just was like just this, you know, feedback loop of negativity that would just always end with me kind of curled up in the fetal position at the end of the night,
Yeah.
crying. And but there was a moment like a year or two into that when I was getting the message that people were concerned that I didn't want to be that. I didn't want people to be thinking of me in that way. I'd always been the good boy, and I didn't want people like worried about me or thinking that I was you know, fucking up. So I did the thing that all alcoholics do, where you have that little springtime of I'm going to get my shit together. I'm going to get in better shape. I'm going to, you know, tone it down. I'm going to be able to show up to events and seem like I have my shit together. You know, I'm going to drink a little less. I'm going to switch to beer and wine. I'm going to, you know, just on the surface, make it more palatable. And I was successful at that for a long time. You know, it's that you don't get better at being an alcoholic. You just get better at hiding it. And convincing yourself, though, you know, ramping up that rationalization and denial that I have this thing under control. And as we all know, over time, that just gets worse until you can't control it anymore. And it took me years to get to that point until I had to really just again come to grips with that in terms of denial, where it was like I don't have control over this thing. My life is totally unmanageable, and surrender to recovery. I went to rehab once. I actually went to the Pasadena Recovery Center where Dr. Drew was doing celebrity rehab with Dr. Drew the first time.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'll admit in my haze of addiction and being stuck in that old life, and that was like what my little sort of warped mind saw, is like, well, this is the place for me. It's the celebrity rehab place, and maybe I'll fit in there, and this will be a cool experience. And there were positive experiences to it, but it wasn't what it looked like on TV. And
Sure.
ultimately, it didn't stick. I mean, I was there for a few weeks. I had some breakthroughs, but then ultimately just wasn't ready to really jump in with both feet and went back at it. Took me another few years before I really hit rock bottom and went to the Betty Ford Center. And that's when my life
Uptown.
really, yeah. Well, at least it was comfortable. It was kind of funny when I was at the Betty Ford Center. It was a different kind of clientele. There were a lot of people like rich Orange County folk and people who'd flown in on their private jets to to stay there. And what I found really ironic, because at that point I was done. I was there to get clean and start my life. I didn't know what that was going to look like, and it was terrifying. But I was there for that reason, not to be at a swanky resort. And a lot of the people who were there would say things like, "Oh God, the food at Betty Ford has gone so downhill. The sheets are, on the bed this is not fine thread count anymore, as like it was a decade ago. Betty Ford has really gone downhill." And I'm thinking to myself, like, you've been here enough times over that much amount of time that you can complain about how the amenities have changed. Like, you
Because so
really
many
don't
people do
get
that.
it.
Yeah, no, I have half a dozen friends that have been to every high-end rehab around the world. They're like, "Oh, yeah." I'm like, "How do you know so and so?" "Oh, we met at La Habilidad in Hawaii, or we met at Cirque Lodge in Utah, or this one or that one." And it was just like they would just use it. They would never really clean up. They would just use it to dry out periodically.
Right, right. There's a little
And I
detox for a
remember a
minute.
mutual friend of ours who will not be named, mother sent her to Betty Ford, and it was like this time of the year, 110, 115 degrees out. And she's
Hmm.
like, "This is Betty Ford. I'm supposed to be taken care of." And I'm like, "Are you not being taken care of?" She's like, "They're making me rake with a leaf rake a pea gravel parking lot." And I'm like, "Well, get to raking, ma'am."
I was actually at Betty Ford in July, in the summertime, and it was 116 on a good day, 123 on a bad day, and just walking from the cafeteria to the dorms, I remember almost getting heat stroke. It was like, but you know what though? All of it was good, man. I would go back and do it again. It's People don't really understand this. Like, when you're not ready, it's the worst experience of your life. When you are ready, it's the greatest experience of your life. Like, to have a moment where you have breakthroughs on that level, where you really gain self-awareness and have that, for lack of sounding cliche, spiritual awakening. I mean, you don't get that many times in your life. And I just look at that as really an experience that I cherish, because it's like, I don't talk to a lot of the people that I was there with at this point, but at that moment in my life, those people were the most important people in my life. And I just cherish those memories, because it just reawakened me to what living was. When you're at the end stages of addiction, like, you're so disconnected from people and life. It's just, I was, drinking till I passed out on my couch every night, and just trying to get through another day without having a panic attack, essentially, was what I was doing. And just, it was like anxiety, pass out. Anxiety, pass out. It's like, what kind of life is that? And so now I'm having like real connections with people, and learning things about psychology and self-care. And that was when I just like discovered new purpose and new meaning in my life. And it was very early on that element, the connection and the service element, being there for my fellows, turned into like, maybe there's something there for me. Maybe there's a whole other chapter in my life that's not stuck in all those wonderful things I got to do in my 20s, and is actually like looking forward into things that could be meaningful on a whole other level, in terms of giving of myself, actually having something to offer that's useful to others, and not just taking all the time. And so that led to me volunteering at an outpatient clinic for a couple of years, leading groups, doing peer support, and just telling my story. And I got a lot of, great feedback in terms of just my temperament and being able to be empathic with the newcomers and just being able to articulate the ideas of recovery. And that just kind of led to me like, maybe I want to do this as a career. And so without missing a beat, something I wouldn't have done when you're in your addiction, you can't even see opportunities when they come, let alone act on them. But in that moment, I could see this was an opportunity, and I just didn't hesitate. I was like, I'm going to figure out how to get a master's degree in psychology and become some kind of drug counselor or therapist. And I just applied and I got into Pepperdine. And a month later, I'm in class learning about mindfulness. And I was just like off to the races. And every single thing in my life since then has been like one thing leading to the next of just following that feeling of purpose and what's going to be fulfilling to me in giving of myself to others. And that led me to write the book, which was just me telling my story because I thought it could be helpful to people. It's led me to speaking publicly and doing, in promoting my book, I've become a public speaker. I've done some keynotes. I have done coaching and now have a podcast, the Harder to Breathe podcast, which has been really fulfilling and a whole new venture.
Great. Check it out, you guys.
Thank you. So it's just kind of like when that light comes on and you realize like there's meaning in the things I'm doing, then it becomes very obvious where you want to be and the things you want to pursue. So I just try to share that with people, what I learned.
Well, I'm proud of you. How long sober do you have now?
Well, my sober date was May 29th, 2016. So it's been over 8 years now.
Huge achievement. I'm very proud of you. So tell me what your daily life as a licensed marriage and family therapist.
Well, it's getting pretty busy these days. I have my day job. I'm actually not technically licensed yet. I'm a registered associate marriage and family therapist.
Okay.
For those who don't know, it's a long, arduous process to become a fully licensed therapist. But I've been a therapist for 4 years almost. You're a trainee, and then you're an associate, and then you have to get a certain amount of hours, and then you have to take the clinical exam. I'm close. I just finished my hours, so I'm waiting on approval for that. In the meantime, I'm still doing my associateship. I'm at a place called the Missing Piece Center for Anxiety in Agoura Hills, California. And then I have my private clients and private coaching clients that I see on top of that. So different days of the week, I'm either in the office at the clinic or I'm doing stuff online from home. And then the podcast has been taking up a lot of my time. I'm sure as you know,
yes.
Just the networking and the correspondence and the booking and then preparing and interviewing and then as it comes out, promoting. And social media was not something that I was likely to do otherwise, but having a book and a podcast out in the world, I've had to make that something I'm a part of now.
Life changes quickly, doesn't it? I spent my whole life trying to hide behind cameras, and then it turns out the universe had other plans for me to be in front of them.
Exactly. I'm on the same page with you. But it's, when you recognize that you have something to offer, it's like, okay, well, I can either just run away from this because I don't want to do the things that are not convenient for me, or I can recognize that there's always things you don't want to do in the course of achieving any goal or any mission that you set out in life. So
that's true.
There's a lot of pros that come with the cons. And so, if some days I'm doing things that aren't the first thing I'd want to be doing, I have to remember, yes, but it facilitates me doing a lot of things that are awesome,
Well, I see you got a beautiful Gibson there and a rack full of snare drums. What are you doing music-wise these days?
Not a lot of time for music these days, but I do, I do it recreationally now. I'll pick up a guitar and just kind of play and
noodle
sing
around. Yeah.
And when I have the right people in the right room, I'll have a jam session. It's been a while since I've had time to really like write or record anything, but it's funny how life takes you in different directions. When I built this room, actually, when I bought this property out in the valley, the idea was that I was looking for a place that had like a second garage or a room over a garage or something that I could convert into a studio. And so that was the whole idea. But I was still drinking. This was like 2013 when I moved out here. And it took us 3 years to break ground on this room just because we ran into every roadblock. It was just it wasn't going to work to convert the garage that was there. It wasn't built well, so I ended up having to knock it down. And there was just all these issues. I'm like kind of on a hillside, so zoning restrictions and figuring out how to do it. So it took 3 years to break ground. I actually broke ground on this room the first week I was at Betty Ford in 2016. And so the timing was ironic, but fortuitous, because while I was at Betty Ford, I was telling everyone, yeah, I'm building a studio. And they're like, what are you going to do with it when you get home? I was like, I have no idea. I mean, I'm either going to, record music, produce music. Maybe I'll rent it out to people. I don't know. Maybe I'll start a record label. I had no idea what direction my life was going to go in at that point. But when I got home, when I got out of inpatient and came home, my first steps into this room were sober ones. And it was a brand new life, and it was just a blank slate in terms of what it would be. And it started with me setting up all my gear and doing some recording and playing, but it was in a much different mindset and a different headspace than I had been in the previous years when I was producing and writing and doing things as an alcoholic. And because I was so invested in this new thing, by the time I was in school, this became my office. I did all my studying for class here. I saw my first clients right here on this screen during the pandemic. When the world was shut down, I was helping people through a computer screen as a therapist trainee during a pandemic. And that was just, it's such a weird full circle kind of moment to be just utilizing this space in such a different way than I had anticipated, and actually feeling purposeful in doing it. And so from there, it became writing my book at this desk. And I'm talking about now, I shoot the podcast in here. And, when I have my own private practice, when I am fully licensed, I might make this my office too. I might just invite people in here and do it in here. So it's like, it was supposed to be something I created in my mind when I was drunk to live the life of yesteryear that I left behind. And then it became something totally new and different that I created in my sobriety.
Well, it's amazing. I really came away enriched from this, because until you really sit down and have serious conversations, there's so much you don't know. Because we've known each other for 25 years, but not that well. So I want to thank you for doing this with me. I really had a great time.
Thank you, Scott. Yeah, this was cool. I didn't know exactly what to expect, because I know that I've read your book and I loved it, but it's a lot of stories that I wasn't prepared necessarily to tell all the dirty details of my life. But
no.
But I'm glad
that's my choice. I don't make them for other people.
No, but
I do love the inscription you put in my book. May I read it to the folks at home?
Please. Of course. Yeah.
Scott, congrats on the successful book launch. I always knew that if you ever hit it big, it would be with something truly disgusting and wildly entertaining. Much love, Ryan Dusick.
Yeah. Well, I think that encapsulates your book and my appreciation of it. It was a lot of fun reading that book, I will tell you.
Good. I really liked yours too. Well, let's see each other in person one of these days. And thank you for being here.
Thank you, man. Thank you for inviting me on. Appreciate it.
All right. Cheers. The Bad Decisions podcast was produced by Cam Borum and Brock Workman of Hurrdat Entertainment. Be sure to like and subscribe on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you get your podcasts so you'll never miss an episode. You can also purchase my book, The Big Book of Bad Decisions, wherever books are sold or at baddecisionsbook.com. A special thanks to today's guest, Ryan Dusick, for joining me today. I'm your host, Scott Nathan. Thanks for listening.